But yeah, so I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit of roles in the industry and how we can leverage it. I think you guys realize today there's a lot of moving parts that's starting to happen, especially if you guys sat in the ISO 19650 kind of workshop. There's a lot of things happening. So that's kind of what we're going to start focusing on. Again, for the QR code, I'll have it on the screen again afterwards. But the focus of the session is the industry needs new type of people and new kind of method of how we're doing things. As you guys can kind of see, technology has become quite a big driving force. And we're going to really start focusing on those kind of items. So let's shine a little bit of a light on what is needed. Right? The first thing is we actually need to look at digital managers. And okay, managers in quotes is not an actual manager, but people that can sort of manage and facilitating these digital items, digital workflows, processes, technologies, and things like that. If you're in big corporate structures, you've got a chief technical officer and CIO. Yeah, these guys typically drive those digital adoptions, ideally through the entire thing. Most of them is heavily business focused and not necessarily outcomes-based focus for our design environment and construction. So, but these guys are a variety of people that you can look at for your digital managers. And I'm going to start here at BIM modelers. These are entry-level guys. These are guys that are adept at using the software better. Now, you won't even know it necessarily, but most drafting offices or architectural firms, engineering firms, have these guys. Guys that know Revit, know Advanced Steel, know Civil 3D, and can model in 3D. It's not like I have to teach someone new skills. It's guys are coming almost out of university with a fundamental skill on being able to use these 3D software. I'm saying some head shakers, I'm saying fundamental skills, not saying good skills. There's a difference. Ideally, a BIM modeler is good at what they do in terms of how to use software. I typically refer to these guys as our draftsmen 2.0. They know how to produce drawings from and BIM models, BIM 3D models and stuff like that, and produce information from it. Okay. Yeah, we don't term it in South Africa much as BIM modelers. You'll still see architectural technologists, junior draftsmen, senior draftsmen, and things like that. But the guys come with skills already in place to start having this name. You see it a lot more. I've seen it a lot more in UAE, your Emirates countries, UK, globally. You see kind of this label coming up more and more of BIM modelers. Then a step onto that is your BIM coordinator. Now, this guy has been in the BIM factory for quite some time and he's got experience. This guy understands how to set up projects, how to make sure that different teams collaborate together. He typically manages the process of information. How do we submit models? How do we package this information, make it available for the rest of the team, etc. And they typically sit on the inside of an organization. And then from there you get your BIM manager. Now, this has been a label kind of thrown around in our industry, like every second guy wants to be a BIM manager. And everyone sells them as BIM managers, and then you ask them for their skill certificate, and they can barely use the software, but they adept at using it. So if you look at kind of the BIM manager, in a traditional sense, more in the kind of call it AutoCAD environment, you had a CAD manager. The guy that was setting up the CAD standards for the office, making sure guys were using the right tool sets for the right process. Same applies for a BIM manager. But also he's got a second function, and I'll term this as part of his manager role. He's supposed to drive the vision of BIM in the organization. So at the end of the day, this BIM manager has two functionalities. He's technically inclined, so he knows the software, he knows his procedures. He typically develops the BIM execution plans and things like that for the organizations. But he also has this management component where he needs to drive to top management what is our next steps for BIM. How do we take this further? How do we grow this? So currently, if you look at most small firms, they only look at a technical part of it. They don't look at the visionary part of BIM. You typically find the BIM manager in your office is the guy that's more of a tech-savvy guy. He doesn't necessarily have the skill, but he likes software more than he likes the other part, so he becomes the guy. He knows how to install the printer as well. And then from there you actually get, if you kind of come back into a BIM designer, I don't really like this term, honestly, because it's mostly a BIM designer, someone that can design in BIM. For me, a designer is a designer. No matter what tool you use the right tool for your design process. And there's a variety of design tools from SketchUp to Revit to SpaceMaker, Civil 3D, or whatever is in your industry, InfraWorks, for the guys more on the civil and infrastructure side. So BIM designer doesn't weigh much for me. And then you get the little one in the bottom, BIM developer, and these are typically your guys that are more coding oriented, so they're programmers that just start specializing in the construction industry and start developing tools for BIM's clientele or people that want to drive more or better BIM software. Make sense?
Do they customize?
Customize, yeah. We actually have two of these guys in-house. So if you look at a BIM department, now, and I mean, this is also an ideal scenario. Not every firm is big enough to have a BIM department. Not every organization needs a tiered structure like this. So, like I mentioned before, your BIM manager is like the leading role. He manages your kind of like department. Your BIM coordinator manages different teams of specialists. And then you've got your BIM specialists. Okay. This image has a CDE manager, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But that's also alignment with the ISO standards where, because everything is moving to the cloud, you need a common data environment. Basically, that's your shared environment. If you look at the ISO standards, we need one platform to manage project information, type thing. And you need someone to manage that process. Now, if you just look at the structure, most organizations currently, my experience, is failing at setting this up, fundamentally. We have guys that can work in the software. We have guys that are jumping the gun and saying, well, I'm a manager, but they struggle with the concept of coordinating projects, making sure the process is set up correctly. As an example, we were doing during lockdown, assisting clients with some cloud adoption, and the first thing, they bought cloud software, like 2 days later they said the software is broken, it's not working, we want to return it. It's like, whoa, let's just look at what's wrong. The guy's like, no, when you pull in the Revit models into the cloud, it's not aligned. But if I look in Revit, my columns are where my columns should be, my HVAC is, everything looks correct in Revit, but in the cloud it's not. I was like, well, truth be told, you didn't coordinate, you didn't set up your project correctly. Your mechanical engineer, I think it was the guy, just linked in the model, placed it correctly, and never shared coordinates. Where the cloud doesn't lie, it shows you the mistakes. And the moment they resolve that, through call it a BIM coordination session, the project could work, going functioning forward. So a BIM coordinator does have a specific role in making sure that when you're doing bigger projects, when you're collaborating with other people, different software connecting, to make sure that these processes and procedures come together and works for the entire team going forward. Yeah.
So the BIM specialists in this setup, would these be your draftsman 2.0?
Your BIM modelers, you got visual programmers, you can have a BIM developer. There's anything that falls as a kind of like a specialist portion that you need like unique skills for. So you still have your college of draftsmen, your designers that'll still design whatever they need to, but you might need to plug different people in at different time to optimize the route going forward. So that's why they just said BIM specialist, because it might be a mix of people, or it could be just BIM modelers, depending on your project needs.
Yeah, I had a problem when we were doing coordination. I think it's what you are talking about. So we're using Revit, we're using Civil 3D. Then when we do coordination, my lights on Revit, they were sitting correctly on contours. But now when we do coordination, they were flying up and down.
I can tell you about 90% of problems I find is models are not coordinated correctly.
So does that setup, so you're saying the BIM manager's job is to make sure from the beginning of the project that you've set up.
So put it this way, the BIM manager's job is to put in the procedures and policies in place to make sure it's done correctly. Your BIM coordinator is the guy that would typically set it up and do it. Okay, so it's just, you have to think of it as like a business in its own. You've got your junior people that's new, they need to do task-based items. You've got to call it a project lead, which is your BIM coordinator, they do certain high-level activities in critical items. And then you've got your BIM manager, your visionary, the guy that says, well, for these projects or these types of projects, we need to set up our processes and procedures in this way. There's newer technologies coming in, this is how we're going to start introducing it on projects. They need to understand the technical component, because they need to word it downwards, but they also need to sell it upwards, to say, why do we need to move to the cloud? Why do I need to spend 20K on a license for whatever reason? What can I win out of it? You know, what do we gain? What do we lose? And all those kind of pros and cons around it. And currently in South Africa, because most guys, we've got a BIM manager. We started with BIM managers to say, well, these are typically technically inclined people. They know the software, they know the industry. So we're going to give them this role, and they start managing almost everything within an organization. But we're reaching this point where we need to start planning our structures better, understanding what type of skills different people bring to the table so we can leverage it better. To reduce time on projects, reduce rework, and all those problems. Cool. Then you get an information manager, or call it the CDE manager, but I prefer the term information manager. Now, information manager is actually identified in the ISO 19650 as almost like a key person in the process. Yeah, who checks the checkers? And then the first question is, do I need an information manager? Right? You guys saw this graph earlier today. This is the ISO kind of quick roadmap. Now you can imagine I've got 6, 7 consultants producing maybe on a large project 20 models with various assets that I need to capture and keep track of. I need someone to validate if my tender documentation complies to my EIR, all those kind of things. Who's doing it? Is the client going to do it? Is the principal agent? Is the architect, the construction, the contractor? Everyone's going to tell you no. Because it's a lot of stuff. And then who checks it continuously throughout the project? That makes sure as this project progresses that we still keep in alignment with our end goal. And that is typically why the information manager has become such a critical part of the process. And kind of like what the name says, information manager. He manages every transaction almost that comes in and out. He does your audits on your files, check compliance items, make sure that what's handed over actually complies to the requirements for that stage or milestone. Now, this has been a big lacking part in global items, and I'm saying lacking just because the ISO standard is about 3 or 4 years old, so it's actually quite young in relationship. So every project is almost like growing a little bit more. But these guys are becoming like items on projects where, how do we do this? Who's managing this? How is keeping track of it? Now, information manager, for the guys that are interested in looking into this role forward, it doesn't have to be a specific organization within the process. It can now be a new company brought into the process as an additional consultant. Or it can fall within the client's item, but it could be a new role within an organization. So as I mentioned earlier today, it's like automation. We kind of get scared about it. And if you look at how much automation happens in the world, there's also a lot of new technologies, a lot of new processes. And just through this roles of the industry, I personally believe there's a whole new set of skill sets and people that we need to look at and employ, or re-upskill, or look at the methodologies of how we employ them or deploy them into our industry. That would make sense to everyone. That's actually quite a quick session. I don't know if anyone has questions. Yeah.
Let's talk about level of detail and the industry here. I think it's a good thing that ISO 19650 is coming. My sense is that the profession have kind of looked at them really just as a way of managing a tentative design. Now, nobody's really gone in and started to work with the metadata to bring forth all these insights. And I think some of these discussions are probably maybe 10, 15 years old. Do you think that the industry is finally ready to move forward in terms of really extracting all those benefits?
No, but when have we ever been ready for anything? So I think for the guys that missed an initial point was level of development or level of detail. Who knows what that is? Okay, 2 or 3 people. Okay, so let me break it down first. So when we look at the design process, traditionally, architects would basically model up the entire building, render it out, and sell to the client, this is what your building is going to look like. Great, visualization, we sell the project, we can start. The lacking part was you've got architectural consultants spending a lot of risk time developing almost a fully furnished building just to impress a client. Okay, which is high risk if you ever speak to architects. Where the ISO standards, and I actually prefer the ISO standards terminology for it, is level of information need. Okay. Level of detail is the UK method language in the PAS 1192. Level of development is the US standards for level of development. But what it basically breaks down to is define what type of information you need at what stage in your project. So if I'm in schematic design, do I need to model a 3D column and car and furniture and everything? Or can I just do schematic layouts, 2D representation of what the item would be? I can go back to the client, it's like, is this working? Let's move stuff around. And then you go into the next stage and you start increasing the quality. So, well, I'm going to now place a 3D chair, but it's just actually a block. I'm saying it's a chair, but it just represents a block. And then up until, if you use the LOD from America, you got LOD 350, which is basically where consultants stop detailing into construction drawings, and then from there on your manufacturing or your shop fitters go and they develop an LOD 400. But the principle is it's always growing information and geometry. So there's 3 components to the ISO standards. The level of information need is you got your graphical, your 3D representation, your non-graphical, your metadata or associated information, and then your documentation. Because no one's going to build off a 3D model alone. No matter what they sell you, you still need to produce drawings or information that's different PDFs, whatever the case might be. But that's typically specified in your project to say, in schematic, we want LOD 200. In the next stage, detailed design, we want LOD 250 or 300, but only on certain items. Once we hit construction, I don't need a fully detailed chair because it's going to be ordered. I just need a placeholder for that to say this is where these types of chairs will be. So that's a mentality you have to take into consideration once you look at an ISO project. Is it should be growing information to a need level. That's why I like the terminology. What is needed? If the operator or facility managers don't need chairs, why am I going to spend hours modeling up chairs or creating the right chairs, for that purpose? Okay, so that was kind of the first item. Now, the second item is, are we ready for this as an industry? So like I said, no. We've always been hammering on the far left, producing amazing 3D models. We want that blender in that kitchen because the client likes the blender for smeg. You spend hours Googling a blender. But the reality is, our guys understand how to use software a lot of times. So we have that fundamental skills. University levels, they're introducing that skills. Not necessarily the best trainers or the best teachers or mentors, but the guys coming out know at least something of the product tools. Okay, so we got the fundamentals already there. Now it's just repurposing the way we look at how we utilize our software. Instead of jumping in the far end, let's rather step back and look at how do we introduce a growing methodology in what we deliver to our clients. And funny enough, I think I had about 3 conversations today already where people were kind of like, is our industry ready for this or not? South Africa has been one of the leading countries in adopting Revit globally. In comparison to UK, to US, we've been ahead of that curve. We've slowly lost movement now with the adoption of ISO or previously PAS 1192. But that's just methodologies we need to incorporate into our design processes. It's not reinventing how we use Revit. It's not going to Revit 2.0 or AutoCAD 2.0. Just using our software better. Hope it makes sense to you guys. Okay. So I was a few years ago, it's about 3-4 years ago, I was in the UK doing a Autodesk University there, walking around. And for me, the interesting thing was, so I don't know if you guys know RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects. They basically are SACAP. They've developed a matrix that is in alignment with the ISO standards, or PASIL M92 back then. That the PASIL M92 was about, I think was developed in about 2006. So that about, was it 6-8 years, 10 years or more than 10 years of PASIL M92 methodology, similar to the ISO methodologies. When I was walking in the UK, speaking to different architects, interior firms and things like that, most of them were still AutoCAD-based companies. Right? So now you tell them, you need to start looking at delivering your products or projects in 3D. They had this huge scare of new software adoptions. All I'm telling or selling to the South African industry is start refining your skills. Start looking at roles within the industry. Who are guys are actually really adept at using a software to a newer level than what traditionally we used to. Let them start setting the path to family creation, template setup, and things like that. Start getting the right people in your structure, organization, however ad hoc it might look, but having that framework of how we should look at this for a growing future will change the way I look at it.
Sorry, one question. So, earlier actually, the plan leave was spoken about. Is that just for compiling your documents for the compliance? But then, if that's the case, then what is the good software if you want to coordinate your Revit model, say, with your mechanical or structural engineer?
So there's a variety of products. So Plannerly, it focuses on documenting this process. Okay. So if you talk about LOD, what quality of 3D model we need at what stage, you want to document in the LOD, in Plannerly. If you start doing 3D coordination, there's a variety of products out there. The one I'm more familiar with is Navisworks, because that runs clash detection and allows me to clash mechanical versus architectural and get a result of where problems are on site. If you're looking at more of a cloud technology, Autodesk Construction Cloud has model coordination as a product, or BIM Cloud Pro and part of it is model coordination. And that allows for cloud collaboration, so effective coordination. I upload a model, the cloud basically does a lot of clashing for me, and I need to start just validating, is it a problem, yes or no, and go through kind of that list. And that typically can also fall within a BIM coordinator's responsibility. If your organization is big enough, you can actually have a separate role, and that person basically just does coordination and clash detection and manages those meetings. Interesting, right?
Yeah. So,
Any other questions? Okay, so as a kind of a last note, because I think some of you guys still want to eat lunch, this is also why Modena exists. We've been doing this for, before my time here, I think we're in it for 21 years now, that we Autodesk resellers and getting guys into the habit of using software like this. But this is why we exist, is to help organization implement new technologies, get the structure in place. I mean, we're a consultancy, so I don't want to take anyone's job. I want to enrich the industry and grow it. And that's why we do events like these, is to help guys look at it, understand it, and then decide how they want to take their roadmaps forward. So yeah, just keep that in mind if you guys have any questions or comments around these kind of strategies in the future. We're really here to help. Yeah.
I just have a question with regards to the roles that you showed us at the beginning of the presentation. So basically, I'm looking at all of them, but then now where do you get certified to be a BIM specialist or a BIM manager?
So last year I ran a poll on this on LinkedIn. And frankly, there's no pure course that'll say, yeah, do this. Oh, there are courses, mostly in UK and America, and I've looked at it in the range from just technical skills to more theory-based skills and everything in between. The way I can really sell it is through actually doing the work and showcasing your skills. Because these roles are really young, how do I teach you something if there's no real example of it? Yeah.
Hi, I believe Africa Academy of
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, there are different ones. I know there's one in the UK that'll teach you about 25 products because they go in as product neutral. There's guys in America that'll basically just say we focus on Revit, and same in Taiwan, across the board. My route, how I got to become a BIM manager, is one, I studied architecture. I practiced for a few years, and then basically come work for Modena. And then the first thing we had to do was become Revit certified. Okay, and that for me is an entry level in your field. So there's Civil 3D, there's different product certifications. Okay, and from that point on, it's really developing your own skills. Okay, and in that LinkedIn poll, I asked the question, is certification important if you want to become a BIM manager or in this industry? And I got mixed feedback. A lot of guys were saying yes, certifications are important because it showcases the fundamental knowledge. Although it's advanced, it's still fundamental in terms of where you can go. And that's what I agree with. If you can do a certification, I still maintain mine. It just validates that you've got a base entry knowledge point. And then from that point on is what the other guys were saying on the far end is start showcasing your skills. It's not just about having it on a piece of paper or having just a reference letter. We've got Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, you've got all these other social media platforms. Start showcasing your capabilities, or even sometimes your ignorance. Because part of learning is showing that you don't know something. Go join the Revit forum on LinkedIn. You'll see a lot of guys say, I don't know what I'm doing, and you check the titles of a manager. It's the principle is like we don't have all the answers. My job for most of my clients is not having the answer, is being able to find the answer and a solution for them. Okay, and keep that in mind. It's never going to be a one-size-fits-all type thing, but it's always a constant growing and understanding, better implementing the way forward and testing. But yeah, to kind of also answer your question, we are looking at developing some courses for it. Hopefully next year we'll be able to launch something more validated.
I think I saw on the site this year you had classes for that. I'm not sure if it's something that you had already started or it's something that you...
No, it wasn't this year. So we typically start with just your normal Revit fundamentals and advanced stuff and things like that. We're actually partnering with 1 or 2 universities to start developing a little bit more technical skill-based workshops with the guys, because getting students out of varsity, they learn all the bad habits. So it's kind of trying to break that process is one of our goals. And then some of the other stuff is also developing these new courses, because we found a lot of clients are looking at us like, how do we get our staff to be competent in these new roles for our industry? And even guys from organizations say, I actually want to grow more in the BIM side of things. How do I do it? So we are building a few of those for next year. Yeah.
With regards to information management, are you also looking into providing some kind of training towards that as well?
It is on our roadmap. It's not at this point an urgent item, if I can put it that way. It's mainly because you need to have an ISO adoption before you can really have an information manager. It's like, you know, what was first, the chicken or the egg, you know? But yeah, these are things we're looking at. So for the information manager role, if you really want to start looking at that, there's already a lot of online content from the UK or training material. We've aligned with Opera Academy. Paul Shillot is one of the developers of the ISO 19650s or co-creators. There's Simply Cert or something like that. They also have ISO 19650 courses. You've got BRE Academy or something like that in the UK that also does these training. Locally, nothing, but if you start looking globally, you'll find some things around the world around that.
So it's a good thing then that, you know, ISO 19650 is coming through. I think what will probably be beneficial is some sort of statutory framework in terms of government coming in and actually asking for projects, especially all state-funded projects, to be on BIM, like happened in the UK and in the US and globally. Then that way, you know, maybe we can see a swifter move towards standardization and, you know, probably more structured, you know,
Yeah, so the reason why I call it everything led up to the ISO 19650, and it mostly kind of came out of European countries and a little bit later out of the States and then Australia and things like that, was mostly government-driven requirements. So the UK basically said, we want to implement PAS 1192, which will be this digital handover of the asset management models and things like that. It was for all publicly owned buildings, basically government-owned buildings. The private sector there wasn't driving it as much. It wasn't a need for them. Looking at South Africa, our private sector is doing a lot more of this, driving this information. Our government sector is lagging behind on that. You guys can speak to Angela. She's there by the BIM community. They are having conversations with, trying to get more conversations with different departments within the government structure to start driving this communication. To say, you need to do this for your facility management going forward, and asset management. But it's going to be a long road.
I think there is hope in terms of adoption, because I remember we worked on a few projects last year and last year, where they provide you with a BEP from inception already. I think Standard Bank actually, they're giving families saying that this is what you're going to use and this is what you're going to need. There was another institution that made sure that one of the requirements is that you comply. They tell you you have to produce to LOD 400, for instance. So I think there is some sort of hope, but then I remember in the briefing session, some of the consultants argued that they cannot justify the cost of the investment, especially if it's a small firm. Why they're spending so much for this technology, which is great, but they cannot really justify the investment. So I don't know, how do you, as an institution, go around that?
Yeah, so you're always going to have a problem with adopters and laggards, or slow adopters and things like that. Ultimately, it's a decision a company needs to make. Is, am I going to take the software forward? Am I going to make the commitment, the dive, the plunge, and start using it? Unfortunately, you can't drive that communication. Your example for the corporate organization, I think you mentioned Standard Bank?
Yeah, Standard Bank.
So for kind of like Standard Banks, and I've got a few banking clients and consultants work with banks, is because of the nature of global footprint. You think Standard Bank is just in South Africa. In reality, you find them almost everywhere in the world, or at least a division of it. So what happens is you'll find one division developing this BIM execution plan or these requirements in the US, and it became like a company policy, which means it filtered down to South Africa. Irrespective of what it says, it's most times wrong for our local industry, and they never repurpose it for that reason. But that's and this is, for me, one of my biggest passions, is to actually drive this knowledge of when do we do BIM and when don't we do BIM. Because yeah, it sounds great, but do we need to do it for every project? Do I need to do a fully detailed asset model for residential? What is the guy going to do with the asset model? Right? Doesn't even know how to replan sometimes. Where on the other side is you got guys that, if I want to do a really smart house in Waterkloof with smart devices, IoT everywhere, maybe an asset model is actually really important for that guy. So at the end of the day, you're going to find there's different tiers for projects. Where do we do what? But it's being able to convey that to the client. Say, listen, for this project, we might have to look at this because of these requirements you need. And whatever your client typically gives you in an ERR or BEP, it doesn't mean it's cast in stone. You can say, sorry, we don't believe it's the correct way of doing this for X and Y reason, and have a conversation around this. I mean, it's a collaboration, it's not individualization. Cool. Then thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's the last time you'll see my face in this table. But I'll be around.